Christina Rossetti, 19th century British poet. Christina Rossetti was born on December 5, 1830, and died on December 29, 1894. Her parents were Gabriel and Frances Rossetti. She was a devout Christian, and she was homeschooled by her mother for her entire life. Some of her famous poems were Remember and Goblin Market. While reading through Rossetti's poetry, I realized that she made a habit about writing many of her poems about dead babies and death in general. I also knew that Rossetti was never able to find a suitable husband because of her religious beliefs, therefore living in loneliness her entire life. I put these two ideas together and came up with Rossetti constantly wrote about death because she wanted to die, so she could be released from the solitude she lived in. For the Art Connections portion of the assignment, I was supposed to find one contemporary piece of art and a piece of art from Rossetti's time period, 19th century, that related to her poetry. While pondering what songs and artwork were about death and had an overall somber mood, the song Violet Hill by Coldplay immediately came to mind because of its slow tempo and literary meaning. My second art connection required minimal research because I realized that Edvard Munch, a painter who specialized in morbid works, lived during Rossetti's time. I found the painting Death in the Sick Room and had discovered my two art connections. The song Violet Hill has a dark and gloomy theme, since it is mostly about war and death. Violet Hill, by Coldplay, makes references to the government, religion, and war, and how they interconnect to worthless war. The band, through the song, is trying to send out a message about the ills of war and pointless death and despair caused by it. The main theme of the song is that the world is in a time of hostility and malevolence. Violet Hill is a reference to a hill in Hong Kong, which was the site of warfare between the Japanese and the Allies during World War II. The overall atmosphere of this song is somber, starting with the line, "It was a long and dark December." The song paints a morbid picture of the war, as told by a soldier who does not relate to the cause of the war that he is fighting. The last four stanzas revolve around love, as it is repeated, "If you love me, then why don't you tell me?" numerous times. These two ideas both relate to the literary thread because, as mentioned above, all the poems analyzed portray imminent death and relates it to the loss or lack of true love. The painting Death in the Sick Room by Edvard Munch depicts death in his family, obviously portraying a morbid scene. In December 1893, Munch started a collection of all his artwork in a poem he called The Frieze of Life, a poem about life, love, and death. In this poem, he used only the pieces of art that he felt explored the themes of life, love, death, and melancholy. As expected, Munch used Death in the Sick Room for one of those featured pieces of art in the poem. In this particular piece of art, Munch is depicting the death of his own sister. It is evident that the painting is very dark and gloomy, like Rossetti's poems, because Munch is showing a room in obvious remorse over the death of his sister. His sister is dead, and everybody in the room is remembering her, but unlike the norm, they choose to do it in solitude. Every person is roughly in their own part of the room, gathering their thoughts, furthering the connection to Rossetti's poems about death and solitude.